It's a bit of a weird way to start, but this morning we're going to talk about feet. And if you notice, the title of the message is Beautiful Feet, but I'm not using this as some sort of vanity project where you're going to look at my feet and think, well, those are especially beautiful. That is not the point of this. But I do want to talk about the fact that this topic of walking and traveling and doing ministry is an active verb thing. And for Paul, the image of feet is one that he uses to sort of communicate this. So I want to start this morning off by talking about feet, because not only is it part of Paul's passage in the book of Romans, but we also have this strange story of Peter getting out and walking on the water. And what do you walk with? Well, obviously it's with your feet. So we're going to use the theme of feet to dig into this morning. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Paul has this really interesting line where he talks about how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the gospel. And of course, he's talking about the mission, the idea that there are people out there that are traveling in order to see and tell as many people as possible all about the gospel. And he said, the people are not going to be able to believe unless they hear. So how beautiful are the feet of those who wander and travel to bring the gospel. And while it is kind of a weird thing to talk about beautiful feet, and hence the beginning of the service, which is kind of designed to be a little bit funny, I also want us to think about the fact how much foot technology has changed from the time of the Bible to now. Of course, we wear socks and shoes or sandals, or as you saw at the beginning of the video, or even barefoot. But of course, that's not the ancient world's feet. Most of the people there were barefoot. It's very dirty. It's very dusty. We have a couple stories of Jesus having his feet washed. He makes a couple of comments about the fact that when he's in the house of the Pharisees, one of the first things that a person is supposed to do when they have guests at that time is to make sure that there's an opportunity for the person to wash their feet, because it's dusty, it's dirty, and most people's feet were beaten up, calloused, very, very filthy, usually caked on with dirt. And so having your feet washed was a very special and a very, I was going to say cathartic, therapeutic. It's a nice feeling. Of course, we know about the woman who washes Jesus' feet, Mary, and anoints his feet with oil and washes them with her tears and dries them with her hair, and how Jesus talks about what a beautiful sort of show of respect and reverence that was. So this idea that Paul using beautiful feet is kind of funny, specifically because the feet at that time were anything but beautiful. They were filthy, they were dirty, they were smelly, and that's kind of the point. So, but for Paul, he says, but the dirtiness, the smelliness, all that sort of stuff in service to the gospel is bringing education, is bringing salvation to people, and therefore these dirty gams at the bottom of our legs become incredibly beautiful, incredibly wonderful tools in the hands of God. That's right, your feet become tools in the hands of God. All right, in case anybody gets motion sickness, I'm going to sit down now so you don't have to watch the rest of the service with me walking around like this. Clean off the bottom of the feet. And then we also have this weird story of Peter getting out of the boat and walking on the water, following after Jesus. Now, when I've heard this sermon preached about, we can talk about the fact that Peter both had and then lost his faith. The idea that the lake is, the storms of life, that it's an allegory, that it's a metaphor, that Peter initially has faith in Christ, and that's why he's able to perform the miracle of walking on the water just like Jesus. But then as he looks around and he sees the water, he gets scared and he loses his faith and starts to sink, which I always thought was interesting because he doesn't just plummet into the water, he actually starts to sink. And then Jesus, of course, chastises him for this very thing, for this lack of faith. I mean, that's all fine, that's good, and I think there's an accuracy in it as well. And as I was reflecting on this week, I was like, okay, so how to bring in this idea of Paul's, line about the beautiful feet, then Peter walking on water, and sort of tie these two things together. And here's what I came up with. I can't. And I mean, on some level, the Peter Jesus account in the Gospel of Matthew, I think is just kind of a very interesting story. And I don't want to over-theologize it by coming up with these deep sort of faith principles that we need to look at. I mean, again, maybe this makes me a poor pastor. But I also just kind of want the story to stand on its own, pun intended. That it's just this amazing story of an encounter between Peter and Jesus. And of course, there's other levels. But for this Sunday, let's just let it be an amazing story. Jesus walks on water to go out and meet his disciples who are on a boat. Peter is invited to do the same thing and has some moderate success, but then ultimately has some failure and is chastised by Jesus, and Matthew, the gospel writer, just moves on with the encounter. And I think there is power in letting the story be just that, a miraculous story that reminds us of the power that Jesus had over the spiritual world, over the human mind and our bodies, but also the natural world. The world of the sea and the lake and stuff like that in the ancient world was a land of chaos. It's where demons lived. It's, just because water is so powerful and it takes a lot to really sort of form it into something. It's just like it's an elemental power. And Jesus walks on it with the solidity of the land. And I just kind of like the power and the majesty of the story, because I also don't want us to just forget the power and the majesty and the miraculous nature of Jesus as captured in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, and then reflected upon through a lot of the writings of Paul. But for this Sunday morning, I really want to focus on this passage in the 10th chapter of Romans, that Paul is explaining what it is that our communities are supposed to be about. I mean, the logos of Westover Baptist were enter to worship, depart to serve. We don't always reflect upon that as much these days, but that is such a wonderful mission statement, because the communities have always been some version of that. We come in, we reflect, we talk about the Bible, we talk about the scriptures, we sing songs, we bond with each other, we spend a lot of time. Sorry, I'm trying to stay in the shadows here so I don't blind myself. But we also go out into our various spheres of influence. We go out into the world. And what Sunday morning is supposed to inform us about is how to communicate and talk about the gospel. And more importantly, how to walk the Christ walk, how to walk as a little Christ, as a Christian. That is the whole point behind this. That our community has always been about in service to those who are beyond our community. That's what sets it apart from just being a social club. And that's in some ways the mission behind everything we've been talking about in these past few weeks. And I wanted to be the mission as we talk about getting back together again, to reach out and to be in community virtually and physically as much as possible going forward. I mean, I just miss you. It's been too many months. And you all know that how busy I am in my other job at the university and whatnot. And I could be feeling guilty, and I have, that I haven't been able to reach out as much as I've wanted to, that I've been working a lot harder than I normally would like to be. But I mean, given the situation we're at, there's not much else I can do. But as I sort of analyzed and tried to break down why I was feeling guilty, a deeper truth began to emerge. It's not guilt that is the dominant feeling that I'm feeling. It's sadness and loss. I just miss being together. I miss our little families. I miss the way you all look, what you're wearing, the different sort of idiosyncrasies of our community, the way, the churches smell, how we smell in a nice way. I'm not saying that you smell. It's all these things. And that made me happy. The sadness of missing you made me happy, because I know what it's like to be part of these faith communities. And I know what it's like to be part of a group of people that, for all of our different reasons, get together specifically because we want to worship this miraculous water walker that invites us to walk on the water as well, and to fumble and fail at it, to have seasons of profound faith that will make us risk, and also seasons where our faith is waning and we even wonder why we're doing this anymore. All of that is part of the faith journey. But what Paul's communicating in Romans is something much deeper. It is the theology of the role of the sacred community. That for all of our different reasons, why we are bound together is because our faith binds us. Our belief and our desire to serve God, and our recognition that God has called us into this sacred community to continue to teach us and grow us and show us the salvation offered by Him and Him alone. I get to benefit from these communities because many years ago, people that aren't part of these communities talked to me and shared with me and showed me the gospel. Now, this happened numerous different times, and it's only something I reflect upon now. And 99% of those times, it did not take. Or I sort of engaged with it a little bit, but as most of you know, I didn't become a believer until I was in my 20s. I mean, I was raised in the church, and so the stories were familiar to me, but it was this moment in my 20s where the faith, my relationship with Jesus, truly began. And I have so many people to thank that were willing to, even if it didn't seem to be successful, were willing to share the gospel with me and invest and show me that I mattered to them, but also to God. And the blessings that have come from that on the other side are too many to count. And I probably actually don't know most of them. But this is what I want our little Westover and Mountsburg Baptist churches to be. Places that have the ability to frame the gospel in countless different ways so we can talk to countless different people. That we can not just know the right words, but actually have encounters with each other to live in a way that it permits us, I was going to say the responsibility, but the privilege, the honor of living out our faith for others. That we don't hoard this to ourselves, but we go out into the world. Believing not that we've figured anything out, but that we have been shown this grace, this mercy, this love. Ooh, my little makeshift stand is falling. Perfect. Oh, it's going this way. You know what? For the rest of this, I'm just going to walk. That we are a community built around the understanding that, as Paul says, everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And his argument is like, if nobody goes to tell them about this, how are these people supposed to know? That's our motivation. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because we've experienced this ourselves. And as we get to know people and like people, we can share this with them. And again, I would say this, and I want to echo the words of another great Christian, Francis of Assisi. It's like, preach the gospel at all times, but only when absolutely necessary. Use words. I miss you because you, as a faith community, have taught me so much about what it means to live day in and day out as a believer. I am your pastor, but on so many occasions, more than I can honestly count, and as I've been reflecting on this book chapter, honestly, more than I can count, you have pastored me on how to pastor you. And that's why this is a sacred community. I'm the one who's, gets the unbelievable honor of studying the scriptures day in and day out. And that's something I take very, very seriously and have a tremendous amount of fun with it. But you have also taught me so much about God. And I'm keenly aware of the loss of that in my life right now. I want my pastors back. I want my faith communities back. I want my sacred communities in these little red brick churches back. And I really think that there is the way we can do church and the way we have done church and the just innate ability to connect with each other and enjoy fellowship with each other is something that other people are longing for. And I want them to know it. I want them to hear how it is that Westover and Mountsburg wrestle with the Jesus event. You've been there for me so many different ways. You've allowed me to be me. You know this, that, the people will look at me and be like, he's a pastor? And I mean, that's fair, because there is a certain understanding that a pastor has to be a certain way. And I'm just not like that. And that can be really problematic. And a lot of faith communities will not allow their pastors to be themselves. And how do I know that? Because I know a lot of pastors. And they're one way when they're with their friends, and they're another way when they're with their faith families, or when they're in their leadership role. And that's not because they're duplicitous or hypocritical. That's sort of the necessity of their job has placed that upon them. But Westover and Mountsburg have never asked that of me. And because of that, I have learned so much from you, and I miss you. We are a sacred community that is called to travel and share the fact that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That is a powerful theological reason, a mission, a verb that allows us to go out into the world and actually calls us to go out into the world. But in order to do that, we need to gather together. So, as I wrap this up and as we start talking about getting back together again, let's look at these communities as an opportunity to go to a spiritual spa, to give us a spiritual pedicure that will give us the beautiful feet needed to bring this good news, this gospel, to the rest of the world. I have been blessed in innumerable ways to journey with you. And we're going to come through this 2020 figuring out new ways of doing this church thing, both because this global pandemic, but also specifically as it pertains to Mountsburg, because there's a flood and we have to sort of figure out how to rebuild this church. But as it goes to Westover, we also need to figure out how to gather up again and to reach out into our community in new and effective ways. So all of this to say, I miss you. And if I may be so bold, I'm looking forward to getting back together again with you and all of us enjoying mutual pedicures. Or is that weird? Let's let it be weird for this morning. I miss you. I love you. Bless you.